Well, thank you, Chairman Joyce and Ranking Member Clark, for holding today's hearing. Thank you to our witnesses for your time today. Like many of my colleagues, I'm also in 2 hearings at the same time, but I appreciate you being here and to follow along with several of the things I've heard, which I want to get into in just a minute. But I do want to note that this subcommittee has an important job. And our purpose on the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee is to protect our communities, to protect the rights of our citizens, and to make sure that what we see in the executive branch and beyond is not overreaching and certainly is not violating the rights of Americans. And I think it's fair to say, in face of the lawlessness that we are seeing across the country right now, that this Congress as a whole has failed to conduct necessary oversight over the last year, ceding Congress's authority to the executive branch and rubber stamping the president's agenda, even when it's unlawful and even when it's unconstitutional. And I'm concerned from some of the comments that I've heard from this hearing already today, as I've been following it, that this hearing is designed to support the Trump administration's use of claims of fraud in state programs, including Medicaid and Medicare, to recklessly deploy ICE agents to cities and states to cut necessary funding and to make fraud prevention and detection more difficult rather than less difficult. There's a lot to say there. There's a lot going on, but we have limited time. So certainly I understand that the Medicaid system in states and the Medicare system are not without real challenges, substantive challenges, and that there is opportunity for real fraud to occur. And certainly we know that it has occurred. You know, in administration after administration, there have been professionals whose sole job it is to monitor, oversee, and root out fraud and abuse, to prosecute cases against those who are committing it. And what we've seen is that early on in this administration, the Trump administration fired most of those people who are responsible for doing this work. So we know that to detect this fraud, we really need experts in the field. We need responsible, nonpartisan investigations, and that's just not happening in this administration, and it's not happening in this Congress. We have limited time, of course, and I do want to get to a couple of questions for Ms. Tillotman. In your testimony, you mentioned the risk of resource management or mismanagement when we don't have reliable data to look at, when the incidents of fraud as it is defined are inflated. And so can you just talk a little bit more about how it leads to a misuse of resources, and so that you can have just a long time to answer sort of the second part of, like, how does that interfere with our job here in terms of proper oversight and reform, and what are the things that we should be thinking about, looking at, and asking for so that we can properly utilize resources and properly conduct oversight?
Thank you for the question. So, ultimately, oversight is only going to function well if it is, independent, well-resourced, highly capable, and then there's a coordinated effort amongst all the individuals that are responsible for rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse in the system. So that's the baseline expectation. The loss of data is everything. I think you've heard this already from several of the other witnesses today, that data quality is a problem, and that's actually been something that's been highlighted by both the IG and GAO routinely. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And the final thing I'll say is there's a very great starting point for Congress right now, and which is all the many unimplemented GAO and IG recommendations. And so when necessary, even providing some sort of timeline to the agencies for completing some of those unimplemented recommendations. And so there's a whole long list, but there's an easy place for people to start, and it's written down and available right now.
Well, thank you. I think that's extremely helpful, and we have limited time here. So the other thing I want to ask is, one of the things we saw at the very beginning of this administration last year was the efforts from Elon Musk and others to go through and cut personnel. Can you talk, with the 15 seconds we have left, about how those recommendations from GAO can be implemented if we're firing the people who are responsible for doing the work?
So certainly, I think most of us can all get behind the idea of efficiency, but Ideally, when we're dealing with oversight processes, we want to make strategic and more targeted cuts. And so since a lot of this was through buyouts, RIFs, and other mechanisms, incentivized retirements, I think if it's not as targeted as it could be, that necessarily doesn't reach the efficiency we would hope when we're dealing with employment issues involving the federal government.
Well, thank you so much. I've gone over my time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.